And so we are once again back to where it all began with the Trump administration, lying about the numbers. That was the first order of business for the first Trump White House press secretary, who was ordered to lie about the number of people who showed up for Donald Trump's inauguration. Donald Trump couldn't bear the shame of drawing a much smaller crowd than the inaugurations of President Obama. And so the solution for Donald Trump, with numbers he doesn't like, whether they be associated with measurements of his wealth or his income or his crowd size or his IQ score, the Trump solution is always to simply lie. The Daily Beast reports President Donald Trump and members of his coronavirus task force are pushing officials at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to change how the agency works with states to count coronavirus-related deaths. And they're pushing for revisions that could lead to far fewer deaths being counted than originally reported, according to 5 administration officials working on the government's response to the pandemic. Lying about his non-existent billions of dollars or his crowd sizes, that's one thing. Lying about these deaths is something else entirely. As of tonight, the United States now has 1,397,416 confirmed cases of coronavirus. In his Senate testimony yesterday, Dr. Anthony Fauci agreed with Senator Bernie Sanders that the real number is significantly higher because we have only tested about 2% of the American population. When Senator Sanders suggested that the real number could be 50% higher, Dr. Fauci did not disagree.
Most of us feel that the number of deaths are likely higher than that number because given the situation, particularly in New York City, when they were really strapped with a very serious challenge to their healthcare system, that there may have been people who died at home who did have COVID, who were not counted as COVID because they never really got to the hospital.
And so as of tonight, the United States has suffered 84,506 reported deaths from coronavirus. And now Donald Trump wants to deny that number. The modeling that has so far proved relatively accurate on the coronavirus spread in the United States says that on August 27th, the day Donald Trump is scheduled to be officially renominated as the Republican Party's candidate for president, the United States of America will have double the number of deaths from coronavirus that it has tonight. On Donald Trump's renomination day, the model now projects that we will have about 160,000 confirmed deaths from coronavirus, and we can be guaranteed that in Donald Trump's nomination acceptance speech that night, that number will be ignored or lied about. Donald Trump has lied about deaths before. The most loathsome lie Donald Trump told as a presidential candidate was that he lost hundreds of friends on 9/11.
How did he keep us safe when the World Trade Center came down? The world, excuse me, I lost hundreds of friends.
When Donald Trump said that in the South Carolina debate, I immediately tweeted that he was lying. The next day, Donald Trump changed the hundreds of friends to many, many friends. He said that he lost many friends on 9/11, and I immediately tweeted that that was also a lie. The truth is that Donald Trump lost 0 friends on 9/11, 0. He did not attend a single 9/11 funeral, not one. And what he was trying to do for his political gain was to steal the grief of thousands of people who lost family members and loved ones and friends on 9/11. Donald Trump was trying to steal their grief and make it his own and turn it into political currency. And that same Donald Trump is now trying to steal the grief of the thousands of American families who have lost a loved one to coronavirus, the thousands upon thousands of Americans who have lost a friend to coronavirus. Donald Trump wants to steal their grief and make it disappear. Just throw it away. Just pretend that grief and those deaths do not exist. It is impossible for Donald Trump to dishonor the American dead in this pandemic more than denying the truth of their deaths. To pretend their deaths did not happen is to pretend their lives did not happen. It is to pretend that their lives did not end in a previously inconceivable way, in a hospital bed, alone in a room, no family allowed, no hand-holding at the bedside on that final day, in that final moment, and then no funeral, no memorial service of any kind where the grieving could gather, where they could wrap their arms around each other to try to contain that grief. Donald Trump is going to dishonor all of that. Moral cartographers have in the past believed that they have mapped the extent of the depravity of Donald Trump. But there's always more. Always. Now that Donald Trump's re-election plan is to lie about the number of deaths from coronavirus, Donald Trump knows that he is going to have to publicly disagree with the government's leading expert on the coronavirus, Dr. Anthony Fauci. And so today, Donald Trump decided to do that more forcefully than he has in the past. Donald Trump, using absolutely zero scientific authority or intelligence, today tried to contradict this statement that Dr. Fauci made yesterday in his Senate testimony about reopening schools.
The idea of having treatments available or a vaccine to facilitate the reentry of students into the fall term would be something that would be a bit of a bridge too far. Even at the top speed we're going, we don't see a vaccine playing in the ability of individuals to get back to school this term. What they really want is to know if they are safe. And that's the question that'll have to be due with what we discussed earlier about testing.
And today, here's what Donald Trump had to say about that.
I was surprised by his answer, actually, because, it's just, to me, it's not an acceptable answer, especially when it comes to schools. The only thing that would be acceptable, as I said, is professors, teachers, etc., over a certain age. I think they ought to take it easy for another few weeks, 5 weeks, 4 weeks, who knows, whatever it may be.
Not an acceptable answer. That's from the person who said this country was going to go from 15 cases of coronavirus straight down to 0 in response to a reporter's question. Not an acceptable answer. That's from the person who America and the world and history must never forget said this.
And then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
Tonight on All In, the new Trump world crisis strategy: lie to you about the number of dead and attack Dr. Fauci. A shocking new report: TV does its part for the re-election campaign. Plus, the Trump gang escapes. How is it that these three men have all been let off the hook as the rest of America's prisoners face the pandemic behind bars? Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Having utterly failed at containing the virus and protecting Americans, President Trump is now going to try to lie to you about the death toll. It was only, of course, a matter of time before it reached this point, but here's the headline from the Daily Beast. Team Trump pushes Centers for Disease Control to revise down its COVID death counts. The White House has pressed the CDC in particular to work with states to change how they count coronavirus deaths and report them back to the federal government. And Dr. Deborah Birx, the coordinator of the administration's coronavirus task force, has urged CDC officials to exclude from coronavirus death count reporting some of those individuals who either did not have confirmed lab results and are presumed positive, or who have the virus and may not have died as a direct result of it. The president's task force is now pressuring the CDC and state officials to change the metrics they use to count deaths so that they are lower. Now, this is despite the fact that we know the actual tabulated, counted deaths that we have are absolutely undercounted. It's hard to find an expert who has looked at this who does not agree. In fact, just yesterday, Dr. Anthony Fauci was asked by Senator Bernie Sanders if the death toll could be as much as 50% higher than the official number. And here's how Dr. Fauci responded.
Most of us feel that the number of deaths are likely higher than that number because given the situation, particularly in New York City, when they were really strapped with a very serious challenge to their healthcare system, that there may have been people who died at home who did have COVID, who were not counted as COVID because they never really got to the hospital. So in direct answer to your question, I think you are correct that the number is likely higher. I don't know exactly what percent higher, but almost certainly it's higher.
Almost certainly it is higher than the numbers we have, higher than the nearly, as of today, 85,000 people, which is where we are now. New York City took the most scrupulous look at this, as Dr. Fauci was talking about. It has, of course, the highest recorded death toll of any city in the world, but it has still missed thousands of deaths. And when experts go back and they look at excess mortality, which is when you compare the amount of people who died in a given year to the year before and the year before that same time of year, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths that are not in the official tallies. Back in April, the city found 3,700 excess deaths. And then earlier this week, the number was revised up to include 5,000 more deaths that were not counted. That's nearly 9,000 previously uncounted deaths right there, in addition to the tens of thousands that we know about. The official figure we have does not actually represent the true size of the devastation and the loss that we as Americans have experienced. And thousands of people are still dying every day. There are still hundreds of people dying in New York and New Jersey. It's even getting worse in other states. Illinois just had its highest one-day death total. The model the White House has reportedly relied on, the one that predicted 60,000 deaths, is now projecting 140,000 by early August. The deaths are real, and they are mounting, and the White House knows it. But the approach all along has been to ignore it. And when that did not work, they tried to bury the inconvenient information that got in the way of their plan to reopen. Last week, the AP reported the Trump administration buried a CDC report with step-by-step guidance on how and when to reopen. On Monday, NBC News exclusively obtained a report by the Pandemic Task Force showing coronavirus rates spiking in heartland communities. And then today, we learned about yet another shelved report, a 63-page CDC report with a far more detailed and restrictive plan for reopening than the White House's guidance released last month. Tonight, we learned the president's nominee to be the nation's top consumer safety watchdog was involved in sidelining those detailed guidelines. Report after report from the Trump administration's own experts buried. And so now, the president's strategy is to lie about the extent of the losses, try to make them disappear using the same tactics widely believed to be used by foreign authoritarian regimes. Of course, this is in line with what has been the president's approach to the virus since the very beginning. He never for a second saw it as a real crisis to be solved, not as an actual threat to the American people that must be dealt with, but simply as a challenge to his re-election, as a set of numbers, a rating system where he was determined to get good ratings. And so back on March 6th, the president gave the game away. Remember, thousands of Americans were trapped on a ship where coronavirus was spreading, a situation where any good leader would want to take them off the ship and test them and treat them. I mean, anyone, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, anyone with a brain, anyone with any shred of empathy or decency, anyone with any sense of public duty, anyone. Americans stranded on a ship with the virus. The president, though, did not want to take them off. No. Despite the fact that he was being urged to by the experts around him, he didn't want to take them off, and he explained to us why. And his answer is the skeleton key to understanding the entirety of the response thus far.
They would like to have the people come off. I'd rather have the people stay, but I'd go with them. I told them to make the final decision. I would rather, because I like the numbers being where they are. I don't need to have the numbers double because of one ship. That wasn't our fault.
I like the numbers being where they are. I don't need to have the numbers double because of one ship. It wasn't our fault. I don't need the numbers doubling. Me, Donald Trump. Been his impulse from the very beginning. Ignore the problem, say it will go away like a miracle, bury facts that get in the way, and then when all else fails, because it does fail, because the virus doesn't care, then you just try to juke the stats. As if people won't actually know that their loved ones are dying. As if you could actually use propaganda to make someone forget that someone they loved in their life who was here a week ago is now gone forever. Here with you now is Aswin Subsang, White House reporter for the Daily Beast, and one of the bylines on the piece about the White House pressuring the CDC to lower its coronavirus death count. Swin, what can you tell us about this effort?
Well, first of all, to go back to what you were saying about President Trump himself, it's very nice when he just says the quiet part loud and the loud part quiet. There's no mystery to it when the president just comes out and says, oh, the death toll and these numbers are hugely politically inconvenient to me. But as my colleague Erin Banco and I reported at the Daily Beast this morning, it's not just President Trump. It's various officials in the White House and on the coronavirus task force, including Dr. Deborah Birx, who have been pressuring the CDC to start doing the numbers and doing the death stats in a different way. The complaints from Dr. Birx include, but aren't limited to, that she thinks it's perhaps suspect or inaccurate that the CDC is including numbers of individuals who had the coronavirus, but perhaps may not have died directly, whatever that means, because of it, in the death count. And she would like to see essentially better categorization. Now, that argument may seem a little bit in good faith than other Trump partisans or Republican partisans, but this isn't happening in a vacuum. When it comes to President Trump himself, as we reported in the story, for weeks, at least the past 2 weeks, he's been telling people close to him in and out of the administration that he would like to see more accurate numbers and that he's grown to grow suspicious of these numbers. There was one person I spoke to who the president has spoken to very recently was saying that he would like a quote-unquote review of how the CDC and other government bodies calculate the coronavirus dead, because he's concerned that maybe someone who had the coronavirus and tripped and fell down a flight of stairs could be counted among the death toll. That's the kind of thing that's on his mind, which may sound rather outlandish to you or me, but those are the things that his suspicion is rooted in regarding tens of thousands that currently stand.
We should just be clear here, right? Again, just to restate what I said at the beginning, like the public health consensus is we are undercounting these deaths when it shows up in excess mortality everywhere. Yes. And also that the origins of this, like so much that gets into the polluted stream that is the president's mind, is just some, sort of conspiracy theories by people close to him, that the death toll is being rigged. There's a bunch of cranks and psychopaths who want to say that the thing isn't actually happening that's happening, but those people have managed to communicate this in a way that it has been funneled into the president's mind that there's some big conspiracy to make him look bad by counting the deaths.
Right, and that is something that he privately vents almost constantly to people close to him within and without the administration. And I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to who for weeks, if not months, have said that President Trump has specifically told me that, oh, people in the media and my enemies in the Democratic establishment would love it if the death toll were higher. They want to paint me as this man with so much blood on my hands, tens of thousands of Americans. It's not a mistake that these conversations are happening, particularly in the Oval Office, when the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, sees the American coronavirus death toll as politically inconvenient to him. And that's true no matter how many times he tweets or says publicly how sad it is that innocent lives were lost.
Fauci yesterday was a little cautious on reopening the economy too soon. Do you share his concern?
About reopening what?
Reopening the economy too soon in some states.
Look, he wants to play all sides of the equation. I think we're going to have a tremendous fourth quarter. I think we're going to have a transitional third quarter. And I think we're going to have a phenomenal next year.
President with another very optimistic outlook on the economy, despite over 20 million jobs lost just last month alone. One of our next guests, Eugene Robinson, writes the president is trying to project a sunny lack of concern on the pandemic. Quote, after 80,000 U.S. deaths, the president still engaged in magical thinking. He has long maintained the virus will go away without a vaccine, though experts tell him it will not. His vanity will not allow him to be photographed wearing a face mask. The phrase whistling past the graveyard comes to mind.
What Donald Trump sees and why we're reading accounts in newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times about the turbulence in the campaign, or poll numbers that show his numbers collapsing in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and close contests in state like Texas. So the American people are watching this play out every day, and they understand that this is not what competency looks like. This is not what a strong leader looks like. And I think that the American people in majority numbers are coming to a conclusion, which is this president is totally out of his depth. He's outmatched completely. He lacks literally every conceivable leadership at a national level in a crisis. And he's failing at a time of testing for the country at a historic level. There has never been an American leader who has performed as incompetently, as ineptly, as poorly as he has. And literally everything he says, we range from the imbecilic, which is the suggestion that the American people should protect themselves by injecting disinfectant, to the daily dishonesty and lying that the American economy, which will touch on 25% unemployment, will magically be restored in the fourth quarter or the first quarter next year. And it's all magical thinking, as Eugene says. Just like when he said 2 months ago that when there were only 15 cases, it would soon go away. Just like when he said the Chinese were doing a great job and he had full confidence in President Xi. This response by this administration couldn't have been worse if you had a group of saboteurs working in the West Wing of the White House trying to harm the country. It's just epically, terribly bad. So we see now the inventions of the ludicrous Obamagate scandal. We'll see the race baiting and xenophobic bash China and blame them. But he'll put himself into the role of America's biggest victim. He will portray himself as the injured party, as what happens in this country, the world's epicenter of coronavirus death and suffering, as our death count crosses the 100,000 person threshold, and then ultimately the 200,000 person threshold, and likely north of that. And none of it ever had to happen. None of it had to happen.